provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition? No,
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in
Okay.
this context.
So you
I'm not a
believe the meaning
biologist.
Here's the deal. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson just accused the Supreme Court of favoring the Trump administration on emergency cases. And Justice Brett Kavanaugh, he pushed back really hard. This happened Monday night at a public event in Washington. Both justices were speaking at an annual lecture honoring a federal judge. And what started as a routine discussion turned into something totally unusual. A public disagreement between two Supreme Court justices. Let me show you what happened. According to reports from the Associated Press and NBC News, Justice Jackson criticized the Supreme Court's handling of what's called the shadow docket. That's the emergency docket where the administration can ask for immediate relief without going through the full court process. And here's what Justice Jackson said. The administration is making new policy and then insisting that the new policy take effect immediately, even before the challenge is decided. This uptick in the court's willingness to get involved in cases on the emergency docket, well, it's a real unfortunate problem. Jackson went further, and I quote, "It's not serving the court or this country well." Now here's Justice Kavanaugh's response. According to those same reports, he pointed out the Supreme Court's approach to emergency requests, it wasn't unique to the Trump administration. The Biden administration received that same treatment. Kavanaugh said presidents push the envelope more with executive orders because Congress is passing less legislation. And I quote, "Some are lawful and some are not. None of us enjoy this." So let's look at the actual numbers. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, the Trump administration has brought approximately 30 emergency applications to the Supreme Court. They've won about 80% of the time. The votes typically break 6-3. The 6 conservative justices in favor and the 3 liberal justices, including Jackson, in dissent. So here's what matters. Justice Jackson is suggesting that there's something unusual about the Supreme Court siding with the Trump administration on these emergency cases. But Justice Kavanaugh just pointed out that this is how the court operates regardless of which administration is in power. And according to Fox News reporting published today, the Trump administration has faced hundreds of lawsuits and adverse rulings from the lower courts. The DOJ doesn't elevate every case to the Supreme Court. They choose the ones where they believe the lower court got it wrong. And when those cases reach the Supreme Court, the justices rule based on the law. Sometimes the administration wins, and sometimes they lose. But Justice Jackson's framing suggests something different. She's suggesting that the court is showing favoritism and that there's a pattern of the administration always winning. Except that's not accurate. According to the same Fox News article, the Supreme Court has ruled against the Trump administration on several emergency applications. They required more notice for certain individuals facing proceedings under the Alien Enemies Act, and they agreed with the lower court on National Guard federalization in Chicago. So the premise of Justice Jackson's criticism just doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Now here's where this gets interesting. This isn't the first time that Justice Jackson has made this argument. In August of this year, she wrote a dissent accusing the Supreme Court majority of what she called Calvinball jurisprudence. Here's her exact quote from that dissent. "This is Calvinball jurisprudence with a twist. Calvinball has only one rule. There are no fixed rules. We seem to have two. That one and this administration always wins. That's a Supreme Court justice accusing her colleagues of rigging the game for one political party. That's quite an accusation. So let me point out what's actually happening here. Justice Jackson is a Biden appointee. She was nominated specifically by President Biden and confirmed by Senate-controlled Democrats. Her confirmation was along party lines. And now she's consistently voting against Trump administration on these emergency cases and suggesting the court is biased when her colleagues disagree with her legal reasoning. Justice Kavanaugh, he was appointed by President Trump. Well, he just explained that the process is the same regardless of the administration. The court evaluates whether lower courts made legal errors, and then they rule accordingly. But Justice Jackson's public comment suggests she views all of these cases through a different lens. Not whether the lower court got the law right or wrong, but whether the outcome aligns with her preferred policy position. According to the Supreme Court's own emergency docket history, justices from both sides of the ideological spectrum, they have granted emergency relief to administrations of both parties when lower courts issue questionable nationwide injunctions or other broad orders. This is standard for the Supreme Court. It's not new. It's not unusual. It's how the emergency docket has always functioned. Justice Jackson is characterizing this as a problem, and Justice Kavanaugh is pointing out it's normal, and it's the operation of the court as it's always been. So here's what's concerning. A Supreme Court justice that's publicly suggesting that her colleagues are making decisions based on political favoritism rather than legal analysis, well, that undermines public confidence in the judiciary. And she's doing this at a time when the trust in these institutions, it's already at a historic low. According to Gallup polling, confidence in the Supreme Court has declined significantly over the past several years. And comments from Justice Jackson, they just don't help. They fuel the narrative that the court is just another political institution making partisan decisions. Whether that's her intent or not, that's actually the effect. Now let's talk about her legal reasoning. In that August dissent, where she accused the court of Calvinball jurisprudence, she wasn't dissenting from an emergency decision about National Institutes of Health and their grant funding. The majority allowed the Trump administration to temporarily cancel approximately $738 million in grant money while that case proceeded through the courts. But Justice Jackson, she argued that this was the court lawmaking from the bench. But here's the thing. Emergency relief is designed to maintain the status quo while a case is being decided. The question isn't whether Justice Jackson agrees with Trump administration's policy on this NIH grant. The question is whether the administration has the legal authority to cancel that funding and whether a lower court was correct to immediately block that action. The majority said that the administration likely does have that authority. Justice Jackson disagreed, and that's legitimate. She can disagree legally anytime she pleases, but framing it as an administration that always wins or suggesting that the court is rigged, that's inserting politics where it should just stay with legal analysis. And that's the pattern that we're seeing from Justice Jackson. According to the Supreme Court records, she has voted against the Trump administration in nearly every emergency case that's come before the court. Her dissent rate on these cases is approaching 100%. And that's her right as a justice. She can dissent as often as she believes the majority is wrong. But when you combine that voting pattern with public statements accusing the court of bias, With dissents that question the integrity of her colleagues, well, it raises questions about the approach that she takes to these cases. Is she evaluating the legal merits? Is she starting from a position of opposition to the administration and then working backwards to find legal justifications? I don't know the answer to that, but her own words and her voting record, well, they create that impression. Justice Kavanaugh's response Monday night was measured. He explained the process. He noted that both administrations received the same treatment, and he acknowledged that these emergency cases are difficult and that none of the justices enjoy having to make quick decisions on a complex legal issue. And that's the kind of response that you'd expect from a justice focused on the law rather than the politics. Justice Jackson's response was to characterize the court's willingness to hear these cases as an unfortunate problem that's not serving the country well. Well, one of these approaches sounds like a legal analysis, and the other sounds like a political complaint. So here's the bottom line. The Supreme Court's emergency docket exists because sometimes the lower courts issue orders that could cause irreparable harm if left in place while the appeals proceed. The justices evaluate whether those lower court orders are sound or whether they're not. And sometimes they side with the government, sometimes they don't. The pattern over multiple administrations, they show that the court applying these standards is consistent with legal principles. So Justice Jackson, though, she's suggesting otherwise. She's suggesting that there's bias. She's suggesting that there's favoritism. And she's doing it publicly while her voting record shows that she opposes the current administration nearly 100% of the time. So that raises questions about who's actually being guided by politics here. The Supreme Court's credibility, it depends on the public believing that justices are applying the law impartially. And comments like Justice Jackson's, they undermine this credibility. Whether or not that's her intention, that is the result. So Justice Kavanaugh, he tried to explain the process. Justice Jackson doubled down on her criticism. So you can decide which approach sounds more like a judge and which sounds more like a political partisan.
We won!
Okay, let's go.
We won!